This one goes back to the story of the science department, my famous science department. And I'm simply going to go and copy and paste into Tinkerplots. Oops, sorry. So now each card represents, now I didn't delete the student's name, so let me see if they cut off the first names anyway. Each card represents a class grade in a particular term. So again, there's lots of cards because each kid takes 7 classes and there's 2 terms and so on. I got lots of cards here. And I received some information that the science department was grading harshly. So my job was to sort of prove that using data and then create an action plan. And so again, I'm going to just color the genders only because it's actually relevant to the conversation. And by the way, I got these data from the IT department. It was a very easy export from we use PowerSchool. And it was a very easy export.
If you're using PowerSchool, have you looked at Inform then as opposed to this?
Sorry?
Have you looked at Inform as opposed to...
Never heard of Inform, no.
Oh yeah, that's
definitely need to look at Inform.
Okay, I'll have to
It's not as probably friendly, but it's much more powerful.
It sounds like PowerSchool.
good luck.
Yeah, okay, no, I've never used it.
No, okay. If
No,
you're doing
for sure.
PowerSchool, you should definitely...
For sure, thank you. Thank you. So what I did is I looked at basic grades, and I find this is something that not a lot of high school principals look at. And I'm just going to show you this picture here. And the first thing I noticed in my school, if I sort of split this up a little bit, yeah, that's all right, is that I had some spikes at 90. I know we had used percentage grades in my school, and there were spikes at 90, 85, 80, 75. So even though we were on a percentage grading system, it was clear that a lot of my teachers were not really grading on a percentage system. They were grading in intervals of 5%. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And it really made us question whether or not percentage grading was really the best system for our school. And so I think one of the priorities that we're going to set for next year is possibly moving to a more 21st century grading system. So that was interesting. But I wanted to focus in on the science department, and I wanted to go and look at a particular term. So again, I'm just going to add in a term, and I'm just going to do Q1, which was the first quarter of this year. And I wanted to go and focus on my particular departments. And I think they were right. The science department is grading low. There's no question. No question. A lot of F's here. Their distribution was more spread out. I think the PE department has the opposite issue. But that was definitely a good starting point. And so I could show this to the science department. I did. And I sat him down in my office and closed the door and I said, I think we need to talk. And then, you know, it's similar with the PE department and so on. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to norm all of your departments together, but you certainly have to norm assessment practices and grading practices, I think. And we were all over the show. So then what I did was they said, well, you know, there's the PE department and the health department. They said, well, let's look at the math department because they're the closest. I said, fine. Let's just look at the math department.
Is your attribute list something you created, or is that coming?
It pulls in immediately. As soon as you import the cards, it creates the attribute list. You don't have to do anything. And it's just, we call it, Boolean operators. If you just mix this up a little bit, put this down here, and department here. And those are two departments that should be somewhat similar, and they're not at all. So we talked about it. We had a good conversation. And they said, well, you know, the science is harder than math. But then I said, fine, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at these students. And so we went through Mr. Wong and Ms. Brown and Mr. Shaw, and we went through all of these students, and we sat student by student and went through the students that I wanted to talk about. And then they said, well, you know, there's a lot of teachers in the department. So what I did was, I said, fine. Let's keep going. And I just like this because I can just use the data, and as they fire questions to me, I can change my data set. So they said, fine. Sorry. And I could also look at teacher by teacher. And I really don't have a department problem. I really have a teacher problem. Mr. Stevens seems to like to fail students. So anyway, so Mr. Stevens and a little bit with Ms. Johnson. Miss O'Connor, I changed these names so I don't really recognize them. Doesn't have too much of an issue, and Miss Wilson's a part-time teacher, and so I'm not saying I'm not going to worry about her, but it's definitely not the focus of my efforts. But Mr. Stevens and I sat down and we went through grading and assessment practices. And we went through this over a whole quarter, and I met with him periodically and so on. And then I wanted to see if I made any progress. So then what I did was, I took this out, and I just looked at Mr. Stevens. What's his name? Daniel? And then I looked at term here, and grade here. Move quarter one up here. And due to intervention, due to actions, I basically changed his grading and assessment practices. And it's data-driven. There's no ambiguity here. It's very clear that he's had a better understanding of how to grade and assess students. Just a very simple example. Just a little caveat here, I went back to the science department, and I don't know what it is about science departments. I used to teach science. But I looked at the science department, and I did notice something else, which is my next project. I don't have a solution yet, but at least the good thing about data is it creates projects for me. So this is now the science department, both terms, and I think that's the picture I want. Anybody see what my next project is? There are only, these are all girls getting A's in the science department. Probably neatness, doing their homework, that kind of thing.
But were you able to correlate the grading with student performance against multiple measures?
I haven't, because that wasn't my goal. You certainly could. You certainly could. I haven't, because that wasn't my goal. My goal was to look purely at our internal grading practices and trying to have some common understandings about grading policies in our school.
There's a lot of assumptions that could inform what.
Absolutely, absolutely. The only problem about using multiple measures and things like this, you can get overwhelmed. So I just thought, keep it simple, move forward, that you can get very overwhelmed. If you have too many multiple different data sets going on, there's so many different things. I mean, this is not very, very hardcore statistics. This is not. You can go and do that. This is just some general trends and things like this. But that's my next project, is to look at why are all the girls getting A's in the science.